On Monday, tens of thousands of people were gathering in Liverpool to watch Liverpool Football Club celebrate winning the Premier League. Then there was tragedy at about 6 p.m. as a car collided with the crowds. 50 people were taken to hospital, 11 people are still in hospital, but we've had more information about the police response and the investigation, and a 53-year-old is still in police custody. We will explain a bit more about what we know on this episode of the BBC's daily news podcast, Newscast. Hello, it's Adam in the Newscast studio, and we're recording this episode of Newscast just after 4 p.m. on Tuesday. So this episode represents what we know about the situation and what the police have been saying at this point. And here is what we know. 50 people were taken to hospital across Merseyside on Monday evening after this incident with the grey Ford Galaxy on Water Street in Liverpool. 11 people are still in hospital, but the police have told us they are in a stable condition. 4 children were amongst the people who were injured in this incident. And then just before 4 o'clock, we got a news conference from 2 senior officers from Merseyside Police, where we got more details of the incident and what the circumstances leading up to it. We also got more details about the arrest that's been made of this 53-year-old and the fact that he has been arrested on suspicion of attempted murder, dangerous driving, and also potentially driving while under the influence of drugs. And the police have been given a few more hours to question that suspect, who is from West Derby, which is on Merseyside. So let's join up all the dots of what we know so far and get all the reactions that we've been getting, whether it's from the royal family or the Prime Minister or people who were there, because we're joined here in the studio by my colleague, BBC News correspondent, Tom Symonds. Hi, Tom.
Good afternoon.
And also joining us down the line is BBC Breakfast presenter Sally Nugent, who you will have seen at the scene on TV on Tuesday morning. Hi, Sally.
Hi.
Do you want to just kind of paint a picture of what it was like there this morning on Tuesday morning, Sally?
Well, it was very, very, I have to say, desperately sad because I was, I'm a Liverpool fan. I've been in Liverpool all weekend. I had been with Jurgen Klopp on Friday night at this massive celebration in the Anglican Cathedral, all about, the triumph and the joy. It was the first time Klopp had come back. He's wildly charismatic. Everybody loves him. And then on Sunday, I was lucky enough to be at the game when they were presented with the trophy. And so this morning, it was just, you could feel the shock in the air. Obviously, there was the police scene, which is all cordoned off, where they weren't able to clean up. Everything else was being cleaned up. So the city was returning to normal. But in that particular street, of course, all the litter was still there, all the debris, all the aftermath of the ambulance service working on people, the police officers who were trying to preserve the scene, the tape everywhere, and various forensic tents and a huge police vehicle that was obviously there to protect the scene, and various police officers who'd, when we got there at 5 o'clock this morning, they'd been there all night. And then at 7 o'clock, that shift changed. So it was eerily the contrast between what was happening yesterday when we were all enjoying that parade. And to give you some indication, they expected 1 million people at that parade, possibly up to 1 million people. And I'd been all over the city all weekend in huge crowds, and I have never felt safer. The irony, it had felt incredibly safe everywhere I went. So this morning was just a shock.
And on Monday evening, how did the information filter down to you as a participant in the parade, rather than as a professional journalist expecting to report on something like this?
Yeah, it's really interesting because obviously I had lots of friends and lots of family who were there, and my best friend was involved, was right there. So I phoned her straight away as soon as I heard, and she was fine. My brother was there and I couldn't get hold of him for some time. And that was really scary for a little while because he wasn't answering his phone. And what I then discovered was because the crowd was so big, there was whole sections of the parade where people didn't even know it had happened. So unless you were in that concentrated place on the pierhead on the waterfront, if you were half a mile away, you just saw big queues for the trains perhaps, or not able to get a taxi home, and thought, 1 million people. But the news filtered to me because a friend texted me who knew I was there, and he said, "Have you seen this? Are you all right?" By which point I was nowhere near it. So, I'd been involved further back in the parade, up in Childwall, out of the city, and the atmosphere could not have been more gorgeous. It was loads of families, loads of kids, everyone with vuvuzelas and whistles and klaxons. And the players came past by us and we saw them. We were right up close to all of them. And you could really feel the joy because, of course, I remember the last time they won the Premier League, there was none of this. So there was a real sense of it being a double celebration, of celebrating for the COVID one and celebrating for this one as well. And it could not have felt more joyful.
And in terms of the incident itself, we can listen now to Daniel Everson, who's been speaking to some of our other BBC colleagues throughout the day about what he saw when this all unfolded.
It was literally from trying to stop the car to seeing my partner going, I don't know where, but away from me. And then they're telling me I don't know where my boy is, to me looking and finding his pram, to not knowing if he was alive and then seeing him alive. It was perfect. And it changed to the worst day of my life. It wasn't until I saw about two people running the other way towards us that the car emerged, and I saw a gentleman on the bonnet. Just chaos, people going flying and people screaming and just terror, pure terror.
And then, Tom, if we fast forward to now, and just before we sat down in the Newscast studio at about 4:00 on Tuesday afternoon, we got a news conference from Merseyside Police, and there was quite a lot of information in that, wasn't it? Do you want to just take us through what we learned?
Yes, I think quite an important update, really, from Merseyside Police. They said that there had been road closures around the city centre during the event, and I've asked the council a follow-up question about that, which I can come to in a minute. That included, they said, Water Street, where this incident happened. And the police said that a car was able to follow an ambulance into Water Street after the roadblock, so presumably the entrance to that closed-off road, was moved out of the way to allow an ambulance through. It was going in to treat somebody who suffered a heart attack. So the car follows the ambulance through, it seems, into a road that was closed and it shouldn't have been in. And of course, we've seen video. The BBC's looked through many videos of the incident. What happens then is that the car ends up in a crowd. Somebody bangs on the car reverses into somebody who's trying to bang on the car, and then carries on down the street into Water Street, into the crowd. And we've all seen the sort of horrific scenes that then followed.
And we've got an update on the investigation as well.
Yeah, so police have arrested a man, a 53-year-old man, who has been arrested on suspicion of attempted murder, dangerous driving, and driving while unfit through drugs. And they have said that he is a white man. And I think that is, of course, as many people are commenting on, pretty interesting, and is entirely based, I think, on a police decision about the safety of the situation in Liverpool with all these crowds there, people, as you'd expect, furious about what has happened and the potential for that to cause trouble, be trouble.
And what did you make of the fact they've repeated that today, and it was part of the police's response very early on Monday evening?
Well, so I think it is a clear decision to do two things: to calm the crowd and to prevent misinformation on social media. Because, of course, last year in the Ruda Cabana case, the Southport stabbings, an awful case, very quickly there were claims that Axel Ruda Cabana, the man who has been convicted of that offence, those offences, that he was a migrant, that he'd recently come into the country, that he was a Muslim, none of which was true. And this is a force that wanted then to put out more information, to say more about this man so that there wouldn't be misinformation. Were actually told by the Crown Prosecution Service, or at least advised by the Crown Prosecution Service, that they shouldn't because it might have legal implications, and so didn't, for example, say what his religion was. And I think this time around they've taken an early decision perhaps to say more, which is something that they've been told they should be doing more often.
Well, yeah, and I was just rereading the report from His Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary, so that kind of the police watchdog. They were looking at the Merseyside police response to Southport last year, and one of the things they said was there will be a social media narrative out there and the person with the best story will win. And there's a quote from a senior police officer saying there are no prizes for second place. So you can see why the police would now want to just get out with the facts really quickly.
Absolutely. The HMIC said the police must communicate the facts repeatedly, continuously and effectively as circumstances change and develop. If not, others will take over the narrative with overwhelming amounts of online content. We are in a different world when it comes to police communications now. It used to be that when somebody was arrested, you simply got the name, you got the reason they'd been arrested, and perhaps some very, very basic details about what had happened. You would not get information about the suspect. That comes when they're charged at a later date. So this is a real change, and it's something the police are very, very, I can tell you, very, very closely thinking about. And I know that the College of Policing, which is the organisation that looks after standards in policing, is putting together something about this particular incident to say more about the thinking.
Oh, so we might get a more kind of formal kind of set of words about how this has been managed.
That's what I'm hearing.
Right. Let's talk about the reaction now. And Sally, have you seen just a massive outbreak of community spirit in the last day or so?
Yeah, and this is the thing, when something like this happens, going back many, many years, when there was a bomb scare at Aintree, I can remember the Grand National that was called off. People took everyone into their homes. It was a little bit like that last night too. Anybody who needed a lift anywhere was offered lifts. The mood was, I would say, quite calm, very, very sad and disappointed, but calm and collaborative. And that's when the city really comes together. And they did. There were huge queues, people trying to get home. I heard of friends who queued for 3 hours for their train, which was like a 10-minute train ride home. And of course, you have to remember, lots of people who went with children, babies, kids in buggies, elderly people. Maybe your granddad hasn't been to a trophy parade in decades, and those are the sort of people who were there. And yeah, we did see the best of community spirit. And it's a little bit of a cliche, isn't it? But it does happen at times like this, particularly in the city. Everybody does try and look after each other. But then again, this morning, I just saw a lot of anger, huge amounts of anger. People really angry that this party was stopped and spoiled. These days, like this kind of like golden weekend when everything seemed to be going so brilliantly and everybody felt so safe, had come to such an abrupt end, and the party was really ended in such a sickening way.
And I suppose, Tom, that's why the police are saying to people not to speculate and not to consume loads of social media theories about this, because it's a potentially quite volatile situation.
Well, there's two reasons for that, isn't there? Aren't there? Clearly, it's a volatile situation. People are going to be angry, understandably, about this. But also, if there are charges, then any information that's in the public domain could be one day seen by a jury that's considering a verdict in a case of this sort. And of course, that's called contempt, potentially, where you can affect the outcome of the jury. And so the police don't want any of that information to be at least too widely shared. But of course, anybody who's looked at social media at the moment, and indeed all media coverage, and there's nothing wrong with that, will see that there is plenty of reporting about what happened, videos and that sort of thing. But it's more the kind of any information behind the scenes that will be an issue.
And in terms of the social media world we live in now, and just talking very generally, how much of a problem is it for potential trials if there's loads of stuff out there and videos, some of which could be real, some of which could be fake, some of which could be edited in a way to be misrepresentative? Does that kind of volume of material pose a problem for the judicial system in whatever circumstances we're talking about?
It does. But I think there are two things to say about that. The first is that if you've ever sat in a trial, maybe people have done jury service and have seen this happen, the judge, before the jury goes out to consider its verdict, and indeed actually every day of the trial, spends quite a lot of time quite firmly saying to the jury, do not consider any information you've heard outside the case, only consider what you've heard inside the case. The jury decides what the facts were. The judge decides what the law is. So that kind of guidance, I think, does generally work because juries, once they've been in a trial for a while, they tend to think like a lawyer almost rather than perhaps a member of the public. The other thing is that there are moves to try and reconsider whether more could be said about these cases within the contempt laws. And so we might see, this is another case, I think, where we might see that sort of thinking leading to potentially the media and the police and other agencies being able to say a little bit more to prevent this kind of misinformation.
And in terms of the reactions, we also got a statement just before we started recording this episode from Buckingham Palace, because the King and the Queen are visiting Canada, and they put out a statement about this as well. So, Sally, I mean, are we hearing anything about whether there's going to be some kind of recognition of this? I mean, I suppose it's it's still quite early days. Is there a way to sort of address what's happened on a kind of community-wide basis? Because you talked about how kind of angry people are, how confused people are, how upset people are that the triumph turned into this tragedy. Is there any discussions about how to sort of turn a corner from this?
Really good question. I would imagine at some point there definitely will be. There's going to have to be a conversation about how to turn the corner on this. On the programme this morning, if you saw any of BBC Breakfast, we had the Education Secretary, Bridget Phillipson, on. We had Steve Rotherham on, who's the City Mayor for Liverpool. And Steve Rotherham was talking about what to do next. What's the message? How do you reassure people? And one of the things that I think we might hear at some point, we've heard on social media from various people, like the Liverpool greats. We've heard from Sir Kenny Dalglish, who has spoken really emotionally about the situation, who, of course, was there and watching it from a balcony as it all unfolded. And I think at some point we might hear from Jurgen Klopp, who made a very emotional return to the game on Sunday. He was in the director's box and I was just a couple of rows in front of him, and it was just, a sea of faces staring up at him and not looking at the football. So he still holds a huge amount of weight here. So maybe at some point we might hear from him, because he would be very good at calming people and helping people set the mood, if you like, for whatever the next thing is. And of course, as you mentioned, there are still people in hospital. We desperately hope that they're doing well. The signs are that they are recovering. So that is incredible news. And that's the thing. That's the most important thing that will help Liverpool if those people get better.
And also, Sally, in terms of the reactions, I mean, we saw a statement from the Irish Taoiseach because there's such an Irish connection with Liverpool.
Yes. And also yesterday at the parade at the part I was in, there were Irish flags everywhere. Huge, the community in Liverpool has, Irish roots that go back generations and generations, and they're proud of that. So, I think we will hear reaction from around the world, actually, because I tell you this, there are Scousers everywhere. And even if you're thousands of miles away from home, this will affect them. This will be felt. It's a really shocking thing for it to happen. And also for it to happen in such an iconic location. We're so worried. That parade is 10 miles long. It's huge. The policing effort is phenomenal. The security that I saw on Sunday was incredible. We felt very, very safe. But also, you have to remember that it goes along that iconic waterfront. You are right next to the river. And so the fear that I always have is, what if someone falls in? What if someone goes over the edge? So that is completely looked after, and everybody was very, very safe. And for something so horrible to happen in such an iconic part of the city, I do think is desperately sad.
Probably worth saying, though, I think there will be an examination of the planning of this event. I've looked quite closely today at which roads were closed and when, and as Sally said, the frontage on the river, that was closed for most of the time. But I think this street where this happened, Water Street, was closed in what the council had told me in the last hour or so was called a rolling road closure as part of their traffic plan. And the other thing is that if a car did manage to go through a barrier, that is something that, if you look at government guidance to prevent this sort of vehicle being in a crowd, there's no suggestion this is terrorism. So but obviously the main threat that is being guarded against in these situations is a terrorist attack. It does say there is a risk that cars will tailgate through these sorts of vehicle checkpoints deliberately, and that's not necessarily the case in this situation. And therefore, people who are guarding those points and people who are planning those events need to think about this sort of thing.
Well, yeah, and Steve Rotherham, the mayor that we were talking about earlier on, that was one of the questions he raised when he was doing interviews this morning. And yeah, you think back to that police statement that we were talking about. Okay, they explained the car tailgating. They didn't explain why that was allowed to happen. So I can imagine people asking a lot of questions about that going forward. Oh, Sally, just because I've got my laptop in front of me and you don't, I've seen there has been a short statement from Jurgen Klopp, who says, "My family and I are shocked and devastated.
Yes.
Our thoughts and prayers are with all those who are injured and affected." And he said, "You'll never walk alone." And he just posted that on Instagram. But I wonder if we'll actually see him and he'll be able to go and talk to people.
I think the idea is that at some point we will see him and he will speak.
Yeah. And also,
I think that's possibly what will happen.
And just as we were talking there, the Home Office was saying that Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, will go to Liverpool on Tuesday evening, and she'll speak to the police. She'll go and visit the cordon, and she will meet other emergency personnel. Now, Sally, before we go, you've got your Liverpool mug just there, haven't you? Just out of shot for
Not
viewers of this
intentionally,
podcast.
but yes.
Yes. Can you just say in a few short but very poetic words why it is so amazing being a Liverpool fan, and what is it like? Explain the aura around that club.
Do you really want
That's an
me to?
impossible job, I know.
It's an impossible. Well, I was born into a family. I've got boys, basically. I've got two older brothers who are all mad Liverpool fans. One of my first baby pictures is of me in a Liverpool baby grow. I didn't have a choice. And I tell you what happens if you're a Liverpool fan. At some point in your childhood, I can't remember how old I was maybe 7 or 8, you get taken to Anfield, you get placed somewhere on the Kop or wherever it is, and you stand up and everyone around you sings You'll Never Walk Alone. And it's a little bit like being baptized. It's almost a religious experience. I defy anyone to go there and not be transformed by that moment, because it does stay with you forever. And I think that's what happened to me.
Oh yeah, and I've been to a lot of football stadiums in the UK in my old job on Newsround, and people will know I'm not an expert on British football, but there is something about going to Anfield, and not just when you're going to see Taylor Swift.
Or Bruce Springsteen.
Yes.
No, and also, don't forget, it's been, as a Liverpool fan, there've been some hard years, really, really hard times and difficult experiences. And it bonds you, I think, to a club, and you stick with it, and everybody sticks together. And that's why I love them.
And just as we finish this recording, there are still 11 people, I think, in hospital. But the good news is the police say that they're all in stable condition, and we'll be thinking about them and their families. Sally, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And Tom, thanks for your info too.
No problem, madam.